The One Piece universe, created by Eiichiro Oda, is one of the most expansive and intricate fictional worlds ever crafted. The story follows Monkey D. Luffy and his quest to find the legendary treasure, One Piece, while encountering a diverse array of characters, conflicts, and power struggles. However, what makes this world so fascinating is how small changes in key events could drastically reshape the narrative. This exploration of alternate realities, what-if scenarios, allows us to consider how different choices or circumstances might have rewritten the fate of the world. One Piece is structured around major pivotal moments, battles, and character developments, and altering just one of these can create a ripple effect, transforming the entire landscape. Some of the most compelling what-if scenarios revolve around key figures such as Aokiji, Luffy, and Akainu, whose actions and fates play a significant role in shaping the balance of power. This analysis delves into three major alternate realities: Aokiji becoming Fleet Admiral instead of Akainu, Luffy awakening Gear 5 during the Marineford War, and Luffy joining the Marines instead of becoming a pirate. In the canonical storyline, the battle for the title of Fleet Admiral after Sengo's retirement was fought between two powerful Marine admirals, Aokiji, Kuzan, and Akainu, Sakazuki. Akainu's ruthless brand of absolute justice ultimately won out, forcing Aokiji to leave the Marines. But what if things had gone differently? What if Aokiji had been the one to claim the role of Fleet Admiral? Aokiji's sense of justice is vastly different from Akainu's. Where Akainu believes in eliminating all threats to order without mercy, Aokiji operates under a more pragmatic and morally balanced approach. If he had become Fleet Admiral, the Marines might have undergone significant reforms. Corruption within the ranks would likely have been targeted more aggressively, and there would be a higher emphasis on individual morality rather than blind loyalty to the world government. However, Aokiji's rise to power wouldn't come without challenges. The Five Elders and other high-ranking government officials favored Akainu because his harsh, unyielding sense of justice made him easier to control. They might not have accepted Aokiji's leadership without resistance. There is even the possibility that the world government would have sought to remove him by force or install someone else to act as a check on his power. Another major change would be the fate of Akainu himself. In the original timeline, Aokiji left the Marines after losing to Akainu. But if Aokiji had won, would Akainu have done the same? If Akainu had left, he might have become a rogue enforcer, forming his own faction to carry out justice as he saw fit. This could have led to a civil war within the Marines or even a second great upheaval in the world's balance of power. Marineford was one of the most dramatic battles in One Piece history. It was the culmination of the war between the Whitebeard pirates and the Marines, with Luffy caught in the middle, desperately trying to save his brother, Ace. At the time, Luffy was vastly outmatched by the powerful admirals and warlords present. But what if, in the midst of all the chaos, Luffy had awakened Gear 5? Luffy's Gear 5, which is linked to the awakening of the mythical Hito no Mi model, Nika, grants him incredible freedom in combat, transforming him into a near-invincible force. If he had unlocked this power during Marineford, the battle's outcome would have changed significantly. Firstly, Luffy would have been able to fight on par with the admirals. In the original timeline, he was barely able to hold his own against characters like Kizaru and Akainu. With Gear 5, he could have evaded their attacks with cartoonish flexibility, countering their strikes with overwhelming force. His ability to turn his surroundings into rubber would have also altered the battlefield itself, making it harder for the Marines to corner him. Secondly, Ace's fate might have been different. In the canon story, Ace died protecting Luffy from Akainu. If Luffy had Gear 5 at his disposal, he might have been able to dodge Akainu's attack entirely or even overpower him. With Luffy's newfound strength, the rescue attempt could have succeeded, and Ace might have lived to continue Whitebeard's legacy or carve his own path as a pirate. However, this scenario also raises interesting complications. If Luffy had demonstrated such incredible power at Marineford, he would have immediately become the world government's top target. Instead of his post-war bounty increase to 400 million berries, he could have easily surpassed 1 billion, making his journey through the new world even more dangerous. The Straw Hats might have struggled to reunite, as the entire world would be hunting Luffy down, seeing him as an existential threat. Perhaps the most radical what-if scenario involves Luffy never becoming a pirate at all. Instead of setting sail to become the Pirate King, what if he had followed Garp's wishes and joined the Marines? Luffy as a Marine would be a completely different character. His strong sense of justice and desire for freedom would likely put him at odds with the world government's more oppressive tactics. However, under Garp's guidance, Luffy might have risen through the ranks as an exceptional soldier. He would have learned haki and combat techniques at an earlier age, making him an even more formidable fighter. One major difference is that Luffy would likely not have eaten the Gomu Gomu no Mi, or the Hito Hito no Mi, model, Nika, as it was later revealed. Without his devil fruit, Luffy would have relied solely on martial arts and haki, developing a completely different fighting style. Alternatively, if he still acquired the fruit, it would be interesting to see how he used it within the Marine structure. Additionally, Luffy's relationships with his crew members would never have formed. Instead of gathering allies across the Grand Line, he might have developed strong bonds with other Marine soldiers like Kobe, Smoker, or even Aokiji. His rivalry with figures like Zoro and Sanji could have taken a different form, possibly fighting against them instead of alongside them. Luffy's biggest internal conflict as a Marine would be his loyalty to justice versus his love for freedom. He would have to make difficult choices regarding piracy, especially if he encountered pirates he admired, such as Shanks. It's possible that, similar to how Aokiji left the Marines, Luffy could have defected after realizing the corruption within the world government. Alternatively, he might have worked to change the system from within, striving to reshape the Marines into a more just force. One Piece thrives on the idea of destiny and choice, and even the smallest changes to the story's major events could have led to drastically different outcomes. Aokiji's ascension to Fleet Admiral could have softened the Marines' harsh stance on justice. Luffy's early awakening of Gear 5 could have saved Ace but made him a larger target, and Luffy becoming a Marine would have redefined his entire existence. These alternate realities not only make for intriguing discussions but also highlight the depth of One Piece's storytelling and the importance of every decision made within its world. In the One Piece universe, the battle for the position of Fleet Admiral was one of the most crucial turning points in Marine history. After Sengo's retirement, the strongest candidates, Aokiji, Kuzan, and Akainu, Sakazuki, clashed in an intense 10-day battle on Punk Hazard. Akainu's brutal ideology won out, leading to Aokiji's departure from the Marines. But what if the outcome had been different? What if Aokiji had defeated Akainu and assumed the mantle of Fleet Admiral? This alternate reality presents a drastically different Marine organization, one where justice takes a more balanced form, power is wielded more responsibly, and corruption within the world government faces greater resistance. One of Aokiji's first actions as Fleet Admiral would likely have been appointing Garp as his closest advisor and enforcer. Garp, despite refusing promotions to Admiral rank, remained one of the most respected and powerful figures in the Marines. Unlike Akainu, who saw all pirates as threats that needed eradication, both Aokiji and Garp understood that the world was more complex and that justice wasn't about blind destruction. Garp's involvement in Aokiji's administration would have strengthened his hold over the Marines. He would have helped to stabilize factions that might have opposed Aokiji's leadership, ensuring that even those loyal to Akainu wouldn't dare openly resist the new Fleet Admiral. With Garp's support, Aokiji would have taken direct action against corruption within the Marines and world government. Unlike Akainu, who enforced absolute justice without questioning the system, Aokiji would have sought to dismantle the hidden powers that allowed criminals like Doflamingo to operate with impunity. To achieve this, he would have formed a secret Marine task force, recruiting individuals who shared his sense of true justice. Some likely members of this elite unit would have included Smoker, a Marine with a strong moral compass who had already demonstrated a deep disdain for government corruption. Tashigi, a skilled swordswoman devoted to justice, aligning well with Aokiji's vision. Kobe and Helmeppo, both young Marines trained under Garp, showing promise as future leaders of Aokiji's new order. Fujitora, a later admiral with a strong sense of justice, who detested the celestial dragons and might have been an even stronger ally under Aokiji's rule. This group would have operated in the shadows, targeting figures like Doflamingo and other government-backed criminals. Unlike Akainu's brutal war on piracy, this force would have focused on dismantling crime syndicates and the corrupt power structures that the world government protected. One of the most immediate and significant actions of Aokiji's administration would have been dealing with Doflamingo. In the original timeline, Doflamingo's connections with the Celestial Dragons allowed him to maintain power in Dressrosa, smuggle weapons, and manipulate world events without facing consequences. Under Aokiji's leadership, Doflamingo would not have been able to retain his Shichibukai status. The new fleet admiral, with the backing of his secret task force, would have worked behind the scenes to gather evidence and expose Doflamingo's crimes, leading to a swift and decisive takedown. Without the protection of the world government, Doflamingo would have faced either execution or imprisonment in Impel Down, drastically altering the balance of power in the New World. His removal would have had ripple effects on Kaido's influence, the underworld trade, and the future of Dressrosa. While Aokiji's vision for the Marines would have been progressive, it would not have come without resistance. The Five Elders, who preferred Akainu's ruthless enforcement of order, would have viewed Aokiji as a liability. His moves against corruption and criminal elements linked to the Celestial Dragons would have put him at odds with the ruling elite. The possibility of a coup within the Marines would have been high. Akainu's loyalists, including powerful figures within the Marine hierarchy, could have conspired to remove Aokiji. This could have led to a covert power struggle, with factions forming within the Marines, those who supported Aokiji's balanced justice and those who believed in Akainu's absolute justice. If tensions escalated, an all-out Marine civil war could have broken out, further destabilizing the world government. This could have resulted in a fractured Marine force, with breakaway factions aligning themselves with different ideologies. One interesting consequence of Aokiji's leadership would have been the Marines' potential relationship with the Revolutionary Army. In the original timeline, Aokiji left the Marines and seemingly began working with Blackbeard. However, his true motivations remained unclear. Under Aokiji's leadership, he might have found common ground with Dragon and the Revolutionary Army. While he wouldn't openly ally with them, his actions against the world government's corruption could have indirectly supported their cause. It's even possible that Aokiji and Dragon would have formed an uneasy truce, recognizing that they shared a common enemy in the corrupt elite. This dynamic would have reshaped the world's balance of power. If the Marines became less oppressive and more focused on true justice, the Revolutionary Army might have been less aggressive in its war against them, focusing instead on dismantling the Celestial Dragon's control. One of the biggest unknowns in this scenario is what would have happened to Akainu. In the original timeline, Aokiji left after losing to Akainu, unwilling to serve under him. But if Aokiji had won, Akainu would have faced a difficult choice: either remain in the Marines and serve under someone whose justice he opposed, or leave and form his own faction. If Akainu defected, he might have become an independent enforcer, waging his own war against pirates and criminals, much like Zephyr in Film Z. This could have resulted in another powerful force in the world, as Akainu would not stop his pursuit of justice just because he lost his position. Alternatively, if he remained in the Marines but as a subordinate, the tension between him and Aokiji would have been palpable. He might have attempted to sabotage Aokiji's leadership from within, leading to further internal Marine struggles. Aokiji's rise to Fleet Admiral would have reshaped the Marines from an oppressive force into a more balanced and fair institution. With Garp as his ally and a secret task force targeting corrupt government figures, the Marines would have taken a stance against criminals like Doflamingo, rather than blindly following orders from the Five Elders. However, this leadership would not have come without conflicts. Akainu's loyalists, the Five Elders, and possibly even rogue Marine factions would have resisted his rule. Whether Aokiji could have successfully maintained his position or whether he would have been overthrown remains a fascinating question. Ultimately, Aokiji as Fleet Admiral presents a more morally complex and unpredictable world, one where justice is not absolute, and the very institution meant to uphold order struggles against its own corruption. This alternate reality would have led to a very different future for the world of One Piece, making it one of the most compelling what-if scenarios in the series. Despite Aokiji's efforts to reform the Marines, he would likely face significant opposition from the world government itself. The powerful figures behind the scenes, particularly the Five Elders and the Celestial Dragons, would see Aokiji as a problem. Unlike Akainu, who was a brutal enforcer of their will, Aokiji was more independent and had a strong sense of personal justice. This would make him difficult to control, and the ruling elites would not tolerate a fleet admiral who did not align with their interests. The celestial dragons, who wield immense influence over the Marines and the government, would be particularly threatened by Aokiji's leadership. They rely on a strict and oppressive system to maintain their status, and any attempt to dismantle corruption or introduce moral oversight would be seen as a direct challenge to their authority. If Aokiji began targeting figures like Doflamingo, who had deep connections to the celestial dragons, it would escalate tensions between the fleet admiral and the ruling class. To counteract Aokiji's influence, the five elders might implement a series of measures to weaken his position. They could promote high-ranking officers who were loyal to them, ensuring that Aokiji's decisions were met with resistance from within the Marine hierarchy. This could lead to a divided Marine force, where Aokiji's loyalists clashed with those who sought to undermine him. One of the most extreme actions the world government could take would be attempting to remove Aokiji entirely. If they deemed him too much of a threat, they might orchestrate an internal coup, using Akainu or other high-ranking Marines to overthrow him. This could lead to a second Marine civil war, with factions forming around Aokiji and Akainu, further destabilizing the world. Alternatively, if direct confrontation was not an option, the world government might attempt to manipulate events to discredit Aokiji. They could manufacture a crisis or spread misinformation to paint Aokiji as an ineffective or dangerous leader, justifying his removal. This kind of political maneuvering would force Aokiji into a defensive position, constantly battling both external and internal threats. If Aokiji recognized the growing threat from within, he would need to take strategic action. One possible course would be forming a coalition of high-ranking Marines who shared his ideals. Figures like Garp, Smoker, Fujitora, and even Kobe could serve as a counterbalance to the five elders' control. With their support, Aokiji could work to root out corruption from within while maintaining a public image of stability. Another possible move would be forging alliances with external forces. The Revolutionary Army, which shared Aokiji's goal of dismantling government corruption, could be a powerful ally. Though Aokiji would never officially align with them, he could secretly cooperate with Dragon's forces to apply pressure on corrupt officials and disrupt the power structures that sought to remove him. That if tensions escalated too far, the situation could spiral into an all-out war between factions within the Marines. Aokiji's forces, seeking to maintain a fair and just order, would battle against those loyal to the celestial dragons and their oppressive rule. This could lead to a splintering of the Marines, with some defecting to Aokiji's cause while others remained under the five elders' control. A worst-case scenario would be Aokiji being declared a traitor and hunted down by his own organization. If that happened, he could be forced into exile, possibly forming a new faction of Marines unaffiliated with the world government. This rogue Marine faction could act independently, continuing to enforce justice while actively opposing the corrupt elite. Aokiji as Fleet Admiral would have been a radical shift for the Marines, bringing them closer to true justice. However, his leadership would have been met with fierce resistance from the world government, who would see him as a threat to their authority. Whether through political sabotage, internal division, or outright war, the ruling elite would not allow him to rule uncontested. Ultimately, Aokiji's fate in this scenario would hinge on his ability to outmaneuver the five elders and maintain his influence over the Marines. If he succeeded, the world of One Piece would be on the path to a fairer system. If he failed, the consequences could be catastrophic, with the Marines fracturing or falling deeper under the world government's oppressive rule. The battle at Marineford, one of the most pivotal moments in One Piece, saw the clash of powerful individuals with far-reaching consequences. Among the most intense interactions during this war was the confrontation between Garp, the legendary Marine hero, and Akainu, the ruthless fleet admiral. However, a crucial moment in the battle was when Sengo, the fleet admiral at the time, intervened to stop Garp from delivering a fatal blow to Akainu. But what if Sengo hadn't intervened? What if Garp had attacked Akainu with no restraint? This hypothetical battle would have undoubtedly altered the course of the war and had significant consequences for the Marines, the pirates, and the world at large. Marineford, the Marine headquarters, was the site of a climactic battle between the Marines and Whitebeard's pirate crew. The war's primary objective for the Marines was to execute Whitebeard's successor, support gas Ace, but it quickly escalated into a life-and-death struggle between two powerful forces. The Marine admirals, Aokiji, Kizaru, and Akainu, represented the Marines' most formidable assets, and each brought their own brand of strength to the fight. Akainu, in particular, stood out as one of the most brutal and merciless figures in the entire series. Garp, on the other hand, was a man who had seen decades of history in the Marine organization. Despite his close relationship with Luffy and Ace, his loyalty to the Marines and his commitment to upholding order were undeniable. Garp's unyielding sense of justice had earned him a reputation as one of the strongest men alive. His immense physical strength and unparalleled combat skills made him a respected figure, but when faced with Akainu's merciless pursuit of justice, Garp's emotional reaction would have triggered a massive shift in the conflict. Garp's intervention in the battle wasn't merely strategic, it was personal. Akainu, in his typical cold-blooded fashion, insulted Garp's family, specifically Ace, as he stood over the pirate's lifeless body. His words were designed to provoke, and they did just that. The sight of Ace's death, combined with Akainu's complete disregard for human life, was enough to push Garp to his limits. If Sengo had not stopped Garp from attacking Akainu, Garp would have unleashed his fury. The powerful Marine hero was known for his raw physical strength, and without the constraints of his duty to the Marine organization or the direct order from Sengo, Garp would have fought with unbridled rage. This would have been a truly brutal battle, one in which Garp's strength, enhanced by years of experience, could have potentially matched Akainu's fiery determination. Garp's fight would not have been just a contest of strength. It would have been a clash of ideologies. Garp represented a more traditional, compassionate view of justice, while Akainu embodied a far more ruthless, uncompromising approach to the law. The two would have clashed not only physically but also ideologically, with the battle serving as a microcosm of the larger struggle between the pirates and the Marines. Akainu, on the other hand, was no slouch in battle. With his devil fruit ability, the magma fruit, Magu Magu no Mi, Akainu could turn his body into magma, making him an incredibly dangerous adversary. His fiery attacks would have been devastating against an opponent like Garp, who relied on physical strength rather than speed or finesse. Akainu was a man who would never back down from a fight, and his ability to withstand even the most punishing blows was legendary. He had already proven his resolve during the battle by killing Ace, which pushed the Marines to take the upper hand. Garp, however, would not let that easily slide. Akainu's combat style was heavily influenced by his philosophy of absolute justice, where any means were justified to achieve his goals. His merciless nature would have made him a dangerous opponent even for someone as skilled as Garp. Yet Garp's strength and experience would have made him a formidable rival, creating a battle of unparalleled intensity. If Garp had been allowed to engage Akainu without interference, there are several possible outcomes that could have resulted. The first would have been the sheer devastation that would have followed in their wake. Both Garp and Akainu were powerhouses in their own right, with Garp being one of the strongest characters in One Piece and Akainu being the man who would eventually become the fleet admiral. A fight between these two would have been nothing short of catastrophic, shaking the very foundation of Marine thought. 1. Garp's victory. If Garp had been able to land a decisive blow on Akainu, the consequences for the Marines would have been severe. Akainu was essential to the Marines' efforts in the war, and without him, their battle strategy would have been in disarray. Garp, after all, had the power to take down pirates of extraordinary strength. He had fought and nearly defeated the likes of Roger, the Pirate King, in his prime. Akainu, while incredibly powerful, might not have been able to withstand the full fury of Garp's attacks. If Garp had killed Akainu, the Marines would have lost their most ruthless leader and, by extension, a significant portion of their military might. In this scenario, the Marine forces would have been severely weakened. The pirates, led by Whitebeard, might have capitalized on this shift, potentially gaining the upper hand and leading to a much more chaotic conclusion to the battle. Sengo, left without one of his most powerful allies, would have struggled to maintain order in the chaotic battlefield. 2. Akainu's victory. On the flip side, if Akainu had managed to overpower Garp, the consequences would have been even more devastating for the pirate forces. Akainu's victory would have symbolized the Marines' unwavering commitment to their brand of justice, and his brutal, no-nonsense approach would have crushed any remaining hope for the pirates. Akainu's brutality, coupled with the loss of Garp, would have demoralized the remaining pirate forces, leading to a swift and brutal end to the war. The impact of Garp's death, especially at the hands of a man like Akainu, would have shaken the entire pirate world. Moreover, Akainu's victory would have solidified his position as the supreme authority in the Marines, paving the way for a more ruthless era. The implications for the world of One Piece would have been catastrophic, as Akainu would have pursued his vision of justice with even greater ferocity regardless of the outcome of the battle. The Marines would have faced profound consequences. If Garp had attacked Akainu, it would have led to further internal division within the Marine organization. While Sengo and the other admirals might have understood Garp's emotional reaction, Garp's actions would have been seen as a betrayal by some, especially given that he was willing to strike down one of his own. This internal conflict would have weakened the Marines, even as they tried to maintain control over the situation. Additionally, the loss of either Akainu or Garp would have caused a power vacuum within the Marine hierarchy. Garp, the legendary Marine hero, would have been hard to replace, and Akainu's death would have left the Marines without their most aggressive and resolute leader. Either outcome would have changed the course of the Marines' actions for years to come. In a battle between two titans, the consequences of Garp attacking Akainu without restraint would have rippled across the world. Whether it was the Marine forces' loss of Akainu, Garp's internal conflict with his comrades, or the chaos the pirates would have capitalized on, the outcome would have been far-reaching. Ultimately, the intervention of Sengo was necessary to prevent a war within the Marines, but had it not occurred, the outcome of Marineford could have been drastically different, with profound implications for both the Marines and the pirates. The Garp kills Akainu scenario is one of the most fascinating alternate realities in the One Piece universe. In this hypothetical situation, where Garp, the legendary Marine hero, successfully kills Akainu, the consequences would shake the very foundations of the Marine organization and the world government. This event would mark the beginning of Garp's fall from grace, as his actions would go against the very ideals of justice that he had spent his entire career upholding. While Garp's attack on Akainu during the Battle of Marineford was halted by Sengo's intervention, let's imagine a world where the old man's rage was left unchecked, leading him to deal a fatal blow to the ruthless Admiral. The aftermath of such an act would have massive repercussions, not only for Garp himself but for the entire world. This scenario would begin with Garp's defiance against the Marine Code and extend to how the world government would respond to the man they had once hailed as a hero. The heart of the Garp kills Akainu scenario is the profound emotional conflict that Garp would face. Throughout One Piece, Garp has always been portrayed as a man of principle, someone who values family but never loses sight of his duty to the Marines and the justice they stand for. However, when Akainu, driven by his cold and unforgiving interpretation of justice, insults Ace's dying moments and continues to attack Luffy, Garp's emotional restraint is finally shattered. His years of maintaining control would come to a head in that instant. If Garp had let his rage overcome him, the battle that would ensue would be catastrophic. Garp, known for his raw physical power, would certainly have the strength to defeat Akainu, whose magma-based powers make him a formidable opponent but not invincible. Garp's attack would have been fueled by a deep personal vendetta, as Akainu's actions had not only led to Ace's death but also endangered Luffy, whom Garp loved as a grandson. With nothing left to hold him back, Garp would deliver a devastating blow to Akainu, ultimately killing the fleet admiral. However, this victory would come at a great cost. In the eyes of the world government, Garp would be seen as a criminal. His actions, no matter how emotionally motivated, would be viewed as an unforgivable betrayal. The Marines' strict adherence to order and discipline would leave little room for mercy in this situation. The same organization that had once hailed Garp as a hero and an icon of justice would now seek his punishment. The world government, led by the Gorosei and the Cypher Paul, would never allow such a direct challenge to their authority to go unpunished. Garp had been an integral part of the Marine establishment for decades. He was not just any Marine, he was the hero who had captured Gold D. Roger, the Pirate King. For years, Garp had been a symbol of Marine pride and military might. But with Akainu's death at his hands, Garp would become an enemy of the state. The immediate response from the world government would likely be swift and brutal. Garp's actions would not only be seen as a personal vendetta against Akainu but as a disruption of the Marines' chain of command. The loss of Akainu, especially in such a dramatic and public way, would create a power vacuum that the world government could not afford. Akainu had been the embodiment of the Marines' brutal philosophy of justice, and his death would leave the organization vulnerable. The world government's first course of action would be to put out a bounty on Garp's head. As a former hero, his reputation would make him a highly dangerous criminal, and the government would spare no expense in tracking him down. While Garp's legendary status might have made him nearly untouchable before, this sudden shift would put him directly at odds with the very system he had spent his life serving. The next step in the scenario would involve Garp's inevitable capture. Despite his immense strength, Garp was not invincible, and there would be numerous individuals, both inside the Marine organization and beyond it, who would seek to bring him to justice. It's possible that the world government would send elite forces, such as the Navy admirals or even Cypherpol agents, to hunt down Garp. The Marines would be devastated by the loss of Akainu, and capturing Garp would be seen as an imperative action to maintain order. Garp's capture, however, would come with its own complications. Despite being a criminal in the eyes of the world government, Garp was not the same as other pirates or traitors. He had deep ties within the Marine organization, and his capture would undoubtedly stir conflicting feelings within the ranks. Some Marines, especially those who fought alongside Garp, might struggle with the idea of bringing their former hero to justice. There might be those who respected Garp's strength and ideals and who would refuse to participate in his capture. If Garp was eventually apprehended, his trial would likely be a public spectacle. His actions would be painted as an act of treason, and the world government would work hard to solidify its power and message by making an example of him. The trial would serve to reaffirm the government's authority, showing that no one, not even the most revered Marine in history, was above the law. The most shocking outcome of this scenario would be Garp's eventual execution. As a former Marine hero and a symbol of justice, Garp's execution would be a statement of the world government's unyielding grip on power. They would use his death as a warning to anyone who might dare to defy their rule, proving that even the most legendary figures could fall under their regime. Garp's death would signal a shift in the balance of power, as it would mark the end of an era of Marine dominance. However, the execution would likely spark significant backlash, both within the Marine ranks and from the pirate world. To the Marines who admired Garp, seeing him publicly executed would be a traumatic experience. Many of them might question the nature of justice itself, wondering if Garp's actions were truly so wrong. To the pirates, Garp's execution would be a bitter reminder of the cruelty of the world government, strengthening the resolve of those who opposed them. The death of Garp would fuel the flames of rebellion, encouraging even more pirates to rise up and challenge the established order. At the same time, Garp's execution would make him a martyr, elevating his status to something more than just a former hero. It would make him a symbol of resistance, particularly to those who viewed Akainu's interpretation of justice as misguided and tyrannical. Garp's death would be seen as the ultimate betrayal by the world government, and in the long term, it would likely contribute to the growing tensions between the government and those who were fighting for freedom, particularly the Revolutionary Army. In the aftermath of Garp's death, the Marines would face a period of internal strife. The loss of such an iconic figure would create a leadership vacuum, and the Marine organization would have to deal with the consequences of losing both Garp and Akainu. The Marines' reputation would be shaken, and their role in the world might be called into question. Some within the ranks might seek reform, questioning whether the Marine philosophy of justice was truly the right one. Others, however, might double down on their commitment to an unforgiving, rigid interpretation of justice, inspired by figures like Akainu and the government's desire to maintain control. The battle over the Marines' future would be far from over, but one thing would be certain: Garp's death would be a pivotal moment in the history of the organization, one that would change the course of events for years to come. In the Garp kills Akainu scenario, the repercussions of Garp's actions would reverberate throughout the world of One Piece. The world government would view him as a criminal, leading to his capture and public execution. This would not only shatter Garp's reputation but also ignite a wave of conflict and unrest that would reshape the power dynamics between the Marines, the pirates, and the world itself. Garp's death would mark the fall of a hero, but it would also be the beginning of a new chapter in the story, one where the lines between justice and tyranny would continue to blur. The hypothetical scenario where Garp kills Akainu during the Battle of Marineford and is subsequently executed by the world government would lead to massive upheaval in the Marine organization and the broader world. Not only would Garp's death be a dramatic and emotional turning point, but it would also result in Aokiji's rise to the position of Fleet Admiral. This monumental shift would have far-reaching consequences for the Marines, the world government, and the pirate era at large. The execution of Garp and the appointment of Aokiji would mark a departure from the brutal, uncompromising form of justice championed by Akainu and would alter the direction of the Marines, potentially leading to a more balanced and tempered approach to justice. Garp had always been an icon within the Marine organization, a symbol of honor and strength who had spent his life upholding the values of the Marine Corps. His actions, particularly during the war at Marineford, demonstrated his deep love for his family and his loyalty to his comrades. However, Garp's killing of Akainu would be seen as an unforgivable transgression, and his execution would have profound consequences. Despite his heroic status, Garp's execution would be a necessity for the world government, as it would be seen as an act of defiance against the Marine leadership. The murder of Akainu would weaken the world government's grip on power and signal to the world that even the most revered figures within the Marines were capable of betrayal. In their eyes, Garp had not only committed murder but had gone against the very essence of Marine justice, which demanded unwavering loyalty to the organization. The public execution of such a legendary figure would serve as a warning to anyone who might dare challenge the world government's authority. Yet, Garp's death would not come without consequences. As one of the strongest figures in the Marine world, his passing would leave a massive power vacuum. This would be further compounded by Akainu's death, as the Marine forces would need to adjust to the loss of both the hero of the Marines and the symbol of unrelenting justice. The Marine organization would be thrust into a period of internal turmoil, and the question of who would fill the leadership void would be central to the next phase of Marine history. In the aftermath of Garp's death and Akainu's elimination, the world government would need a new leader to steer the Marine forces. Aokiji, the former admiral of the Marines' Lazy Justice, would be the logical candidate to replace Akainu as Fleet Admiral. Aokiji's approach to justice stood in stark contrast to Akainu's fiery and uncompromising methods. Aokiji had always been portrayed as more laid-back and thoughtful, believing that justice should be flexible and not absolute. His calm demeanor and willingness to think critically about complex situations made him a far more nuanced leader than Akainu. Aokiji's appointment would be a significant departure from the path of uncompromising justice that had defined the Marines under Akainu's leadership. As Fleet Admiral, Aokiji would bring a sense of balance and reason to the organization, and his tenure would likely focus on fostering a more understanding approach to justice. His methods would not be without controversy, particularly among more hardline Marines, but his presence would usher in a period of change. Aokiji's concept of justice, often referred to as lazy justice, was grounded in patience, careful consideration, and empathy. He did not believe in a justice that punished every infraction without thought or care. Instead, Aokiji felt that true justice required a broader view of the world, one that considered the circumstances behind a person's actions, the cultural context, and the long-term effects of decisions. This more flexible interpretation of justice would be a stark contrast to Akainu's absolute justice, which tolerated no deviations and saw all pirates as enemies deserving of death. With Aokiji at the helm, the Marines would likely begin to show more restraint in their actions. The mass executions of pirates or the indiscriminate slaughter of civilians in crossfire would become less common, as Aokiji's more tempered approach would focus on preserving life rather than simply eliminating threats. While Aokiji would still pursue pirates and criminals, his approach would be less brutal, aiming to capture rather than destroy. This could create a more sympathetic image for the Marines, potentially leading to greater cooperation with some of the pirate factions or civilians who had long viewed the Marines as ruthless oppressors. While Aokiji's approach to justice would be a breath of fresh air for some, it would undoubtedly lead to internal conflict within the Marines. The organization was filled with hardline Marines who believed in the absolute enforcement of the law, even at the expense of morality. Those who had been staunch supporters of Akainu would likely oppose Aokiji's rise to Fleet Admiral, seeing him as too weak or indecisive. Aokiji's leadership would put him at odds with these Marines, creating tension and division within the ranks. The impact of this internal division would be seen in the way the Marines executed their missions. Aokiji's leadership would likely result in fewer extreme actions like those carried out under Akainu's command, but it would also create a scenario where some factions of the Marines would rebel or sabotage Aokiji's directives. Those who believed in Akainu's brand of justice might not easily accept the change, leading to friction between the new fleet admiral and his subordinates. Furthermore, Aokiji's rise to power could weaken the morale of the remaining admirals who had followed Akainu's lead. Kizaru, Aokiji's fellow admiral, was more neutral in his approach but might find himself caught in the middle of these conflicting ideologies. The arrival of new, younger admirals with their own views on justice could further complicate the situation. Aokiji's rise as fleet admiral would undoubtedly change the way the world government viewed the Marines. Under Akainu, the Marines had been a ruthless instrument of absolute justice, using their overwhelming power to crush any opposition. However, Aokiji's philosophy was more pragmatic, and the world government, which had always relied on the Marines to enforce their will, might have reservations about his more lenient stance. While the world government would still expect the Marines to maintain order and protect their interests, they would now have to adapt to Aokiji's leadership style. This would likely lead to greater tension between the Marines and the government, as the world government would demand absolute obedience while Aokiji would push for more discretion in certain matters. The role of the Marines in suppressing piracy, rebellions, and uprisings would be tested, as Aokiji's approach would likely prioritize negotiation over force in some instances. Additionally, Aokiji's rise would influence how the Marines interacted with pirate crews and other factions. Aokiji might see opportunities for diplomacy, where Akainu had seen only enemies to be eliminated. His leadership might even provide the opportunity for some pirates to negotiate with the Marines, leading to a more complex relationship between the two factions. The age of indiscriminate war would slowly give way to a more complex, nuanced relationship between the world's strongest military force and the pirates. Under Aokiji's leadership, the Marines would begin to transition into a new era, one that prioritized understanding, negotiation, and, where possible, rehabilitation rather than blind justice. While Aokiji would still pursue pirates, his methods would be far less extreme than those of Akainu, and the Marines might have a more positive image in the eyes of the world. However, this change would not come without its challenges. Aokiji's more humane and balanced approach would face constant opposition from factions within the Marines who adhered to the harsh principles of Akainu's justice. These internal divisions would threaten to destabilize Aokiji's command, but his calm demeanor and thoughtfulness would make him a leader capable of navigating these conflicts. Over time, Aokiji's leadership could bring about a more united and principled Marine organization, one where justice is no longer an absolute, unforgiving force but a nuanced concept that takes into account the complexities of the world. Ultimately, Aokiji's rise as fleet admiral would represent a crucial turning point for the Marines. The transition from Akainu's brutal justice to Aokiji's balanced philosophy would be a profound shift, both within the Marine organization and in the broader global context of the One Piece world. The consequences of Garp's death and Akainu's murder would be far-reaching, setting the stage for a new, more complex era of conflict, where the true nature of justice would be up for debate. In the epic Battle of Marineford, Garp's emotional and moral struggle came to a head as he confronted Akainu, the embodiment of absolute justice. Had Garp successfully killed Akainu in the heat of the moment, it would have altered the course of the Marine hierarchy and the larger battle. However, if Akainu had survived Garp's attack and continued his brutal assault on the Marines, it would have led to a different outcome, particularly in the inevitable clash between Akainu and Aokiji for the position of Fleet Admiral. In this alternate scenario, Akainu's survival would set the stage for a dramatic battle for leadership, one where Aokiji, the calm and measured admiral, ultimately emerges victorious due to Akainu's weakened state. In the original timeline, Garp was unable to strike the fatal blow to Akainu, thanks to Sengo's timely intervention. However, in this alternate scenario, Garp's attack lands with full force, but Akainu survives, albeit severely wounded. The assault would leave Akainu's body battered, possibly with broken ribs or internal injuries, making him appear vulnerable. Still, Akainu's tenacity and sheer will to fight would prevent him from going down easily. Akainu's pride and commitment to his vision of justice, an unyielding, brutal force against pirates, would push him to continue fighting despite his injuries. Surviving Garp's attack would not have been easy for Akainu. His magma-based powers, though immensely destructive, are not immune to physical harm. However, his body, much like his will, is resilient, and he would continue to fight even in a severely compromised state. Akainu would be struggling to maintain his composure and control of the battlefield, but his unrelenting hatred for pirates, especially Luffy and Whitebeard's crew, would drive him to continue his assault. Despite his injuries, Akainu would still represent the brutal, no-compromise faction of the Marines, those who saw the Marines' role in the world as an uncompromising force for order. With Akainu wounded but still in command, the stage would inevitably be set for a confrontation between the two admirals, Akainu, still the face of absolute justice, and Aokiji, the more flexible and pragmatic admiral who has always believed in a lazy justice philosophy. Akainu's survival would be a double-edged sword. While he still represented the extreme enforcement of law, his physical state would hinder his ability to fight at full strength. This would put him at a significant disadvantage against Aokiji, who, though uninjured, would have the moral and tactical upper hand in a leadership battle. The power struggle between Akainu and Aokiji had always been inevitable, even before the battle at Marineford. Their differences in ideology, Akainu's rigid, harsh, and unforgiving view of justice versus Aokiji's belief in mercy and a more nuanced understanding of right and wrong, had made them rivals. Aokiji had always seen the cost of Akainu's extreme brand of justice, knowing it would ultimately lead to division within the Marines. But with the weakened Akainu, the contest would become less about ideology and more about physical strength and endurance, with the battle for the title of Fleet Admiral being the ultimate prize. In this alternate scenario, the duel between Aokiji and Akainu would likely take place soon after the chaos of the Marineford battle has died down. With Akainu weakened, Aokiji would see this as his opportunity to challenge his longtime rival. The clash would be an epic confrontation between the two admirals, with their opposing philosophies reflected in their combat styles. Akainu, despite his injuries, would still bring tremendous power to the fight. His magma-based attacks, ruthless and unrelenting, would reflect his absolute justice mentality, seeking to obliterate anyone in his path. He would push forward with relentless aggression, seeking to crush Aokiji with the same fury he had shown throughout the war. However, due to his injuries, Akainu's attacks would not have the same unbridled ferocity as before. He would be slower, less able to react with his usual speed and precision, and his attacks would lack the intensity that he is known for. Aokiji, on the other hand, would approach the fight with his usual calm demeanor, using his ice-based powers to create a battlefield that would favor his more methodical and defensive style. Aokiji's abilities to control temperature and create structures of ice would give him the advantage in controlling the environment. His fighting style, less about brute force and more about tactical advantage, would allow him to wear down Akainu, forcing the weakened admiral to fight in ways that would exacerbate his injuries. Aokiji would not aim to destroy Akainu immediately but to outlast him, waiting for the right moment to strike decisively. As the battle rages on, it becomes clear that Akainu's physical state is his greatest disadvantage. While he is still a fearsome opponent, his magma powers are more difficult to maintain when he is struggling with internal injuries. Aokiji, with his more controlled approach, is able to evade Akainu's most powerful attacks while landing several precise, debilitating blows. Slowly but surely, the battle shifts in Aokiji's favor, as Akainu's stamina begins to run out, and his injuries continue to take their toll. After a prolonged and grueling battle, Aokiji emerges victorious. His calm, calculated approach to the duel allows him to exploit Akainu's vulnerabilities, and despite the latter's immense strength, Aokiji's resilience and adaptability give him the edge. With Akainu finally incapacitated, unable to continue fighting due to his severe wounds, Aokiji stands as the new victor, and the path to becoming Fleet Admiral is now clear. Aokiji's victory over Akainu would represent a significant shift in the Marine organization's leadership. Unlike Akainu's brutal, uncompromising vision of justice, Aokiji would bring a more measured, thoughtful approach to the role of Fleet Admiral. His leadership style would be characterized by patience, understanding, and a belief in balancing justice with mercy. He would not allow the Marines to become an authoritarian force that crushed every threat without thought or hesitation. Aokiji's lazy justice would shape the Marines into an organization that aimed to maintain order while understanding the complexities of the world around them. Aokiji's rise to Fleet Admiral would have far-reaching consequences for the Marine organization. Under Akainu, the Marines had become a symbol of fear and absolute order, using violence and intimidation as their primary tools. Aokiji's leadership, however, would introduce a more nuanced view of justice. While the Marines would still pursue pirates and criminals, Aokiji's approach would encourage restraint and consideration in how the law was enforced. There would likely be some resistance within the ranks of the Marines, particularly from those who supported Akainu's brutal justice. Officers and soldiers who had been part of Akainu's faction might rebel against Aokiji's leadership, unable to accept a more tempered approach. However, Aokiji's calm and composed nature would allow him to handle these internal divisions more effectively than Akainu ever could, potentially bringing about a more unified Marine force in the long run. Aokiji's leadership would also represent a shift in the way the Marines interacted with pirates and civilians. The rigid, unforgiving policies of Akainu's reign would be replaced with a more strategic approach, allowing for the possibility of negotiation or compromise in certain situations. Aokiji would prioritize capturing pirates alive and understanding the circumstances surrounding their actions, leading to fewer outright executions or acts of extreme violence. In this alternate Garp versus Akainu outcome, the survival of Akainu and the subsequent duel between him and Aokiji for the title of Fleet Admiral would lead to a profound change in the Marine organization. Aokiji's eventual victory would signify a shift in Marine philosophy, moving away from the absolute, uncompromising justice of Akainu and towards a more balanced, empathetic form of law enforcement. Aokiji's leadership would usher in a new era for the Marines, one where justice is not just about punishment, but also about understanding, restraint, and strategic action. This shift would have far-reaching consequences not only for the Marines but also for the world at large, as the Marines would now operate under a more temperate, thoughtful approach to justice, which would reshape the global order in unexpected ways. In the aftermath of the Battle of Marineford, the aftermath of Garp's choice to either surrender to the world government or escape would be a pivotal moment that could alter the course of the One Piece world. If Garp had chosen to escape rather than accept his execution, the consequences for both the Marines and the broader world would be profound. As one of the most legendary figures in the Marines, Garp's decision to flee would set him on a path to becoming a fugitive from the law, perhaps aligning himself with forces like the Revolutionary Army. This alternate path would drastically change the dynamics within the Marine organization, the world government, and the struggle between justice and freedom. Garp had always been a figure defined by his independence, his principles, and his unwillingness to back down in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite his close ties to the world government, especially as a vice admiral, Garp had never fully embraced their authoritarian methods. His rivalry with figures like Sengo and Akainu, as well as his more lenient view of justice, had always put him at odds with the higher-ups of the Marine Corps. Even though Garp was never a pirate, his actions and personal values often placed him in a morally gray area, especially in the case of his family and his relationship with the Straw Hat Pirates. If Garp had chosen to escape his execution rather than face it, it would have been a profound act of defiance. His escape would be seen as a rejection of the world government's authority and an assertion of his own autonomy. Garp's sense of justice, which was always more aligned with personal morals than institutional law, would have been the driving force behind this decision. The world government, however, would not have easily accepted Garp's refusal to submit. His legendary status, combined with the moral implications of his actions, would make him a major target for the world government's wrath. The world government would not take Garp's escape lightly. As a hero of the Marines, Garp's rebellion would be a tremendous blow to their authority. His escape would lead to a widespread public scandal, shaking the very foundation of the Marines' prestige. If a figure as revered as Garp could escape justice, it would suggest that the world government's power was not as absolute as it seemed. There would likely be massive consequences, including an intensification of the crackdown on dissent and rebellion within the organization. The Marines would be forced to go into overdrive to track down Garp, sending their best forces to find and capture the legendary hero. There might even be an internal restructuring, as the world government would want to ensure that Garp's escape didn't embolden other high-ranking Marines or civilians. Sengo and Akainu, especially, would feel personally insulted by Garp's defiance and would stop at nothing to capture him, perhaps even resorting to extreme measures to prevent other potential defections. Garp's escape would also create an ideological division within the Marines. Some would view Garp's actions as an affront to their values, while others might sympathize with him, questioning the legitimacy of the world government's rule. This could lead to significant fractures within the Marine organization, as members with conflicting views on justice might be forced to take sides. If Garp were able to build a following, it could ignite a wave of internal rebellion, challenging the world government's iron grip on the military. As a fugitive, Garp would be forced to go underground. His status as a former vice admiral and one of the most powerful men in the world would make him a target, but it would also provide him with significant resources and connections to evade capture. Garp's combat abilities, honed over decades of service, would make him a formidable adversary to anyone sent to apprehend him. He would likely rely on his extensive network of allies, friends he had made throughout his long career, as well as his unparalleled knowledge of marine tactics and operations. Living as a fugitive would force Garp into a more isolated existence, constantly moving from place to place to avoid capture. However, Garp's deep sense of justice and moral compass would likely push him to align himself with those who shared his values, those who stood against the world government's authoritarian rule. In particular, this could lead him to form an alliance with the Revolutionary Army. One of the most intriguing possibilities for Garp's escape would be his eventual alignment with the Revolutionary Army. The Revolutionary Army, led by Monkey D. Dragon, has always stood in opposition to the world government's control over the world. They fight for the liberation of oppressed peoples and for the dismantling of the power structures that keep the masses under control. Garp, despite his position within the Marines, had always shown a level of discontent with the world government's extreme methods. His deep connection to the cause of freedom, demonstrated through his family's ties to the Revolutionary Army, would naturally lead him to sympathize with their cause. By joining forces with the Revolutionary Army, Garp would lend his unmatched experience and strategic brilliance to their efforts. His knowledge of marine tactics, military strategy, and combat would make him a valuable asset to Dragon's forces. Moreover, his presence within the Revolutionary Army would serve as a symbolic blow to the Marines and the world government, sending a message that even the highest-ranking officials could turn against them. Garp would become a symbol of resistance, an example that it is possible to defy the powers that have long oppressed the world's population. With Garp's leadership, the Revolutionary Army would gain further credibility and strength. Garp's tactical genius could provide the Revolutionary Army with new ways to disrupt the world government's operations, strike at the heart of marine power, and create chaos within the government's ranks. His presence would be a moral boon to the cause, inspiring many who were previously too afraid to act. For Garp, his decision to escape and align himself with the Revolutionary Army would represent a form of redemption, a chance to atone for the mistakes he made within the Marines and to fight for the kind of justice he believed in. Garp's escape would lead the world government to pursue him relentlessly. The Marine forces, already weakened by the losses at Marineford, would now be tasked with capturing one of their former heroes. This pursuit would add an additional layer of tension to the ongoing war between the Revolutionary Army and the world government. With the Revolutionary Army gaining more strength, the world government would escalate their military efforts to maintain control, possibly leading to an all-out war that could redefine the power structures of the world. The world government, unable to accept the defection of such a prominent figure, would likely issue a global manhunt for Garp. Not only would they want to capture him for his role in the execution of Akainu and his rebellion against their authority, but they would also want to send a message that defection from their ranks would not be tolerated. The world government's retaliatory actions might include cracking down on other high-ranking Marines or even targeting innocent civilians who might sympathize with Garp's cause. Garp's decision to escape would send shockwaves through the world. Not only would it shatter the image of the Marines as an unshakable force for justice, but it would also inspire others to question the legitimacy of the world government's rule. With the Revolutionary Army growing in strength and numbers, and Garp's leadership adding to their ranks, the world government would face a growing rebellion that could tip the balance of power. This could spark an era of conflict where former allies become enemies, and the lines between justice and tyranny become blurred. Garp's involvement with the Revolutionary Army would serve as a catalyst for a new wave of dissent, with many beginning to see the world government as the true enemy of freedom. The eventual outcome of this resistance would shape the future of the One Piece world, potentially leading to the downfall of the world government and the rise of a new world order, one where the freedom of the people is valued over the enforcement of oppressive, authoritarian rule. That Garp's decision to escape instead of surrendering would have lasting effects on the course of history in the One Piece world. As a fugitive, he would be forced to navigate a dangerous new reality, but his eventual alignment with the Revolutionary Army would mark a dramatic shift in the balance of power. The consequences of this decision would ripple through the Marines, the world government, and the people of the world, reshaping the ongoing conflict between the forces of tyranny and the forces of freedom. Garp's legacy, once tied to the Marine Corps, would become inextricably linked with the struggle for liberation and justice, further solidifying his role as a hero in the eyes of those who resisted the world government's control. The Battle of Marineford was one of the defining moments in the One Piece series, a culmination of years of tension, conflict, and high-stakes drama. The world's most powerful pirates and the Marines clashed in a dramatic showdown, with Whitebeard and his crew of pirates seeking to rescue Ace from the clutches of the world government. The Marines, led by figures like Admiral Akainu and Vice Admiral Garp, fought to maintain control and punish the pirates. However, what if an unexpected wild card had arrived at the battle? What if Kaido, one of the 4 emperors of the sea and the self-proclaimed strongest creature in the world, had decided to join the fray? Kaido's presence at Marineford would have undoubtedly altered the outcome of the war. As a character driven by a desire to cause chaos and destruction, his arrival would have escalated the conflict to a whole new level. With Whitebeard already in the thick of the fight and the Marines pushing back with all their might, Kaido's participation would create immediate chaos. It's important to consider both the tactical ramifications and the emotional effects of Kaido's intervention in this critical battle. Whitebeard, the captain of the Whitebeard Pirates, was already recognized as one of the most powerful pirates to ever live. His devil fruit ability, the Gura Gura no Mi, granted him the power to create shockwaves capable of devastating entire islands and shaking the world. His sheer physical prowess, combined with his command over the powerful Whitebeard pirates, made him a fearsome opponent. However, Kaido, known for his monstrous strength and his ability to shrug off almost any form of damage, was a whole other level of threat. If Kaido had arrived at Marineford during the height of the battle, he would have undoubtedly turned his attention to Whitebeard. Their confrontation would be an inevitable clash between 2 of the world's most powerful pirates, both with immense reputations and enormous ambitions. Kaido, with his dragon fruit and his near invulnerability to death, would be an equal, if not superior, match for Whitebeard in terms of raw strength and destructive power. The destruction Kaido would unleash on Marineford could rival Whitebeard's own, creating a battleground even more chaotic than it already was. Their battle would be one for the ages, likely resulting in widespread devastation, with shockwaves threatening to tear apart the entire Marineford island. The other pirates, including the Whitebeard pirates and the Blackbeard pirates, would likely be forced to intervene, creating a 3-way battle of extraordinary proportions. From a tactical perspective, Kaido's arrival would throw the Marines into disarray. While the admirals were powerful, having to focus on not just Whitebeard but also Kaido would stretch their resources to the limit. The constant back and forth between the 2 emperors would make it impossible for the Marines to focus on one side, and key figures like Akainu would find themselves overwhelmed by the chaos. Garp, who was already struggling to maintain control over the battlefield, would also be forced to make a tough decision. Would he prioritize neutralizing Whitebeard or try to contain the monster that is Kaido? The presence of Kaido would force Garp and the other Marines to rethink their strategies, adding an unpredictable element that could have turned the tide in favor of the pirates. If Kaido had sided with the Whitebeard pirates, the Marines' losses would have been catastrophic. If he joined forces with the Marines, it would have been nearly impossible for the pirates to hold their ground. The possible change in leadership among the pirates would also have been significant. Kaido, known for his brutal and self-serving approach, could have easily toppled Whitebeard's leadership had he chosen to align with Blackbeard or even take charge himself. Whitebeard's weakening presence could have allowed Kaido to either directly challenge him for leadership or seize the opportunity to create a more chaotic battlefield where the outcome would be uncertain. Ultimately, Kaido's arrival would likely have brought a more devastating and unpredictable outcome to the battle. Whitebeard, despite his power, would find himself fighting not just for Ace's life, but for the very survival of the pirate fleet in the face of Kaido's overwhelming force. The war's outcome would have been uncertain, and it's possible that Ace's execution might not have been the primary focus of the conflict at all. Kaido's presence would likely have overshadowed everything, making the event even more of a turning point in history. Luffy's journey to becoming Pirate King has been marked by immense growth in strength, wisdom, and resolve. Central to his evolution as a fighter is his development of the various geared forms, each of which unlocks new levels of power. Gear 2nd, Gear 3rd, and Gear 4th have all been pivotal in defining Luffy's fighting style and his ability to overcome his strongest foes. But what if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 at a much earlier stage of his journey? What would this early awakening mean for his battles and the composition of his crew? Gear 5, a form that Luffy unlocks much later in the manga, is the manifestation of his full potential, powered by his mastery of the abilities of the Gomu Gomu no Mi and his creativity in applying them. In Gear 5, Luffy's body becomes even more malleable and elastic, giving him the ability to stretch, compress, and expand in ways that break the laws of physics. It grants him immense speed, power, and durability, while also giving him a heightened ability to think on his feet and adapt to almost any situation. The form also allows Luffy to push his limits, making him nearly untouchable in battle. If Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 during childhood, the most significant and immediate effect would be on his development as a fighter. Luffy's early battles were marked by his scrappiness, his reliance on his instincts, and the lessons he learned from his encounters with powerful foes. If Gear 5 had been unlocked earlier, Luffy would have had an overwhelming advantage in nearly every fight he encountered. Even from his early days in the East Blue, Luffy would have been able to take on much stronger opponents without the same level of risk. His battle with Captain Kuro, Don Krieg, and Arlong, for example, would have been entirely different, with Luffy's speed, power, and adaptability putting him in a class far beyond the pirates of his home region. But the early awakening of Gear 5 would also change the dynamic of Luffy's journey. His challenges would no longer be about growing stronger to match his opponents, but about finding purpose and meaning in his power. Early mastery of Gear 5 could have led to a quicker resolution of many of his early conflicts, but it also may have robbed him of some of the emotional and strategic growth that came from his battles. Overcoming adversity and gaining strength through hard work and pain is a fundamental part of Luffy's character, and unlocking Gear 5 early might have made him feel invincible, leading to a sense of complacency or even arrogance. One of the most interesting effects of an early Gear 5 would be the way it impacts Luffy's relationship with his crew. Luffy's growth has always been tied to the bonds he shares with his friends and companions. If Luffy had been able to defeat his enemies so quickly and easily, it could have affected the development of key crew members. Characters like Zoro, Nami, and Sanji, who grew alongside Luffy, may not have been pushed to the same limits, and their individual growth may have been stunted. For instance, Zoro's rivalry with Luffy has always been based on their shared growth, with Zoro aiming to be the strongest swordsman and Luffy working towards becoming the Pirate King. If Luffy had surpassed Zoro's abilities so early on, it could have created friction between the two, potentially even making Zoro feel irrelevant in comparison to his captain. Similarly, Nami's role as the navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates is predicated on her unique abilities and knowledge. If Luffy had been so much stronger early on, Nami might have found it difficult to contribute as much, especially in the crew's early adventures. Furthermore, an early Gear 5 would have drastically changed Luffy's interactions with his enemies. The enemies Luffy faced on his journey were often larger-than-life characters with massive ambitions. Early mastery of Gear 5 would have made these adversaries less formidable, possibly leading to more straightforward victories. While this would mean fewer hard-fought, life-changing battles, it might also result in Luffy's journey feeling less meaningful. With Gear 5 unlocked at such an early stage, Luffy would likely have garnered attention from the world government much sooner. The rise of a young, seemingly invincible pirate would have been alarming to the world government, and the early formation of the Grand Line's most infamous pirate crew could have led to even greater opposition. Instead of growing slowly into the role of Pirate King, Luffy might have faced far more intense resistance from the world's most powerful forces, who would have seen him as a threat long before his conquest of the Grand Line. Additionally, Luffy's early power could have had a significant impact on the formation of his crew. As he journeyed through the Grand Line, Luffy would have attracted even more ambitious pirates and bounty hunters, eager to join him for the opportunity to be part of a crew led by such an unstoppable force. His crew could have grown faster, with even more diverse and powerful members, but the journey might have felt less organic. In both scenarios, Kaido's arrival at Marineford and Luffy unlocking Gear 5 early, the changes would create ripple effects throughout the world of One Piece. Kaido's intervention at Marineford would turn the battle into an even more chaotic, destructive event, likely resulting in a different balance of power between the Marines and the pirates. Meanwhile, Luffy's early mastery of Gear 5 would alter his growth as a fighter and change the composition and dynamic of his crew. These shifts would undoubtedly have far-reaching consequences, impacting Luffy's journey, the battle between the forces of freedom and oppression, and the entire world of pirates. The One Piece universe is one defined by the unexpected, and both of these alternate scenarios reflect the endless possibilities for the future of the series. The Alabasta arc is one of the most pivotal moments in One Piece, marking not only the crew's growth but also the point where Luffy truly steps into his role as a future pirate king. Luffy's victory over Crocodile, the Shichibukai and mastermind behind the chaos in Alabasta, is a defining moment in the series. However, what if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 during the Alabasta arc? The impact would be far-reaching, with a faster defeat of Crocodile, altered relationships within the crew, and a potential early alliance with Nico Robin. Let's explore how these changes would affect the events of Alabasta and shape the timeline of Luffy's journey. Crocodile, with his powers from the Suna no Mi, Sand Fruit, was a formidable opponent for Luffy. In their first two encounters, Luffy was severely outmatched. Crocodile's ability to turn his body into sand made him nearly invulnerable to Luffy's attacks, with the only way to harm him being the use of water or blood. Luffy's struggle to figure out how to fight Crocodile was one of the central tensions in the arc, and his eventual victory came after a prolonged series of defeats. The emotional weight of this victory was significant. It wasn't just a battle of strength, but also of willpower, determination, and the growth of Luffy's character. But if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 earlier, the entire battle dynamic would change. Gear 5, Luffy's ultimate form powered by his mastery over the Gomu Gomu no Mi, now revealed to be the Hito no Mi model, Nika, makes him far more powerful, adaptable, and resilient than in his previous forms. His body becomes much more malleable, allowing him to stretch, compress, and rebound in ways that go beyond even the basic elastic properties of his devil fruit. If Luffy had used Gear 5 in his confrontation with Crocodile, the battle would have been much shorter and more one-sided. Gear 5's increased speed, power, and durability would have given Luffy an edge against Crocodile's sand-based attacks. Luffy's ability to shift his body into exaggerated forms and reshape himself would allow him to avoid Crocodile's sand projectiles and attacks more easily, rendering Crocodile's sand manipulation ineffective. Additionally, Gear 5's ability to bounce back from heavy damage and the unpredictable nature of Luffy's transformations would make Crocodile's own attacks less impactful. The fight would likely be over much more quickly, with Luffy overwhelming Crocodile's defenses and using his powers to counteract the Sand Fruit's advantages. A fast defeat of Crocodile would drastically alter the timeline of events in Alabasta. Rather than a prolonged struggle and the need for Luffy to gather his allies and formulate a plan, Luffy would be able to confront Crocodile head-on with overwhelming force. This could have saved many lives and alleviated the suffering of the people of Alabasta, who had been caught in the crossfire of the war between Crocodile's Baroque works and the royal family. One of the most significant consequences of Luffy defeating Crocodile earlier would be the impact on Nico Robin's involvement with the Straw Hat Pirates. In the original timeline, Robin initially sided with Crocodile, having been manipulated and coerced by his promises of power and a place in the world. She joined the Straw Hats reluctantly but ultimately found a family in them. Her character arc was deeply tied to her decision to trust Luffy and the crew, with her past of abandonment and betrayal creating emotional barriers she had to overcome. However, if Luffy were to defeat Crocodile faster, the chain of events leading to Robin's eventual decision to join the Straw Hats would change. Instead of being forced into the position of working for Crocodile and facing an eventual choice between him and Luffy, Robin would likely be more inclined to join the Straw Hats earlier. In this alternate timeline, Luffy's victory would be the catalyst for Robin's emotional shift, showing her that there was more to life than the cruel and manipulative forces she had been aligned with. It's possible that she might have chosen to reveal her true allegiance to the crew sooner, ending her time with Crocodile and committing to the Straw Hat Pirates before the final battle in Alabasta even occurred. Robin's early inclusion in the crew would have huge ramifications. First and foremost, it would change the dynamics of the crew, as Robin's intelligence, strength, and knowledge of the world would have been an invaluable asset long before the Straw Hats reached Skypiea or Enies Lobby. Her early involvement would also mean that the crew would have gained access to her expertise in navigating the Grand Line, as well as her ability to decipher poneglyphs, which would become crucial in later arcs. Her early alliance would also allow Luffy to develop a deeper bond with her, strengthening the sense of family and camaraderie within the crew. Her decision to stand with Luffy against Crocodile would show that she was no longer a pawn in the schemes of powerful figures but a true member of the crew, fighting for a common cause. In the original timeline, the Water 7 and Enies Lobby arcs were major turning points for the Straw Hat Pirates. During Water 7, Robin was captured by the world government due to her ties with the mysterious organization known as the Revolutionary Army and her knowledge of the poneglyphs. Her capture led to the Straw Hats' invasion of Enies Lobby, a high-stakes mission to rescue her that cemented the crew's resolve and loyalty to each other. The subsequent formation of the Grand Fleet, and the conflict with the world government that followed, became one of the most dramatic storylines in the series. However, if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 earlier, the timeline of these events would change dramatically. A stronger Luffy would have prevented Robin from being taken in the first place, which would stop the entire Enies Lobby arc from unfolding as it did. Robin's capture was central to the events of Water 7 and Enies Lobby. Without a stronger Luffy, the Straw Hats were forced to make drastic decisions, including engaging in a full-scale battle against the world government at Enies Lobby. Luffy's relentless desire to rescue Robin and their shared history of trust ultimately led to one of the most emotional moments in the series, the declaration "I want to live" by Robin. If Luffy were able to prevent Robin's capture through his greater strength, the Straw Hats would not have had to wage war against the world government at Enies Lobby. The need for a high-risk rescue operation would be nullified, saving the crew from the immense emotional and physical toll of that conflict. Without the invasion of Enies Lobby, the Straw Hats would have continued their journey through the Grand Line without the bitter war with the Marines, a major event that left permanent scars on both the crew and the world government. Another major consequence of Luffy's early mastery of Gear 5 would be the absence of the formation of the Grand Fleet. The Grand Fleet, a massive alliance of pirate crews that pledged allegiance to Luffy, came together as a result of the Straw Hat Pirates' victory at Dressrosa. The alliance was a direct result of Luffy's success in defeating Don Quixote do Flamingo, a powerful warlord and one of the most influential figures in the underworld. However, if the crew had never needed to invade Enies Lobby to save Robin, Luffy would not have gained the notoriety and reputation that led to the creation of the Grand Fleet. Luffy's quick rise to power and his bond with Robin would likely have kept the crew from becoming the focal point of such large-scale alliances. Without the Grand Fleet, the Straw Hats would have remained a smaller, more intimate group, though still undeniably powerful and capable. Without the emotional and narrative weight of Robin's capture at Enies Lobby, the world government would likely still be aware of her existence and her potential as a threat. As a result, they might have continued to hunt her down, possibly sending agents to confront the Straw Hats at later points. However, with the crew growing stronger and Luffy in possession of Gear 5, they would have had the power to fend off these attacks with far greater ease than before. Luffy's early unlocking of Gear 5 would significantly alter the course of the One Piece story, particularly in the Alabasta, Water 7, and Enies Lobby arcs. By defeating Crocodile faster, Luffy would not only speed up his rise to power but also solidify his crew's sense of unity, with Robin joining earlier and forging stronger bonds with the crew. Robin's earlier inclusion would also change the course of events in later arcs, as the crew would have gained her knowledge and expertise long before the challenges of Skypiea, Water 7, or Enies Lobby arose. The absence of the need to invade Enies Lobby and the formation of the Grand Fleet would have drastically changed the scope of the Straw Hat Pirates' journey. While Luffy's stronger abilities would have made the crew more powerful, it would also have shifted their motivations, potentially leading to a different path toward the Pirate King. The altered timeline would create a very different One Piece world, one where the Straw Hats would have more control over their fate, with a much more solidified and united crew that would continue to challenge the status quo. Luffy's development in One Piece has been marked by continual growth and the unlocking of new abilities, with Gear 5 being the latest and most powerful transformation. This form, which is tied to Luffy's connection to the Hito no Mi model, Nika, a mythological Zoan fruit, gives him unprecedented abilities that make him virtually invincible against most enemies. However, while Gear 5 would undoubtedly make Luffy an overwhelming force, it would not be a cure-all for every challenge. In certain situations, such as against powerful foes like Kizaru, Luffy's lack of Haki would still present significant challenges, creating a unique dynamic in key arcs like Thriller Bark and the Sabaody Archipelago. Let's explore how Gear 5 would alter these arcs, as well as the consequences of Luffy's journey during Impel Down and Marineford. The Thriller Bark arc is a pivotal moment for the Straw Hat Pirates as they confront Gecko Moria, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. The arc features numerous battles, including Luffy's clash with Moria himself, who uses the Koge no Mi, Shadow fruit, to control shadows and manipulate them into terrifying zombies. Moria's ability to steal shadows and manipulate them into his minions poses a unique threat to the Straw Hat crew. If Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 by the time of Thriller Bark, the entire conflict with Moria would have played out very differently. Gear 5 grants Luffy incredible resilience, agility, and the ability to transform his body into an almost malleable, cartoonish form, making him more difficult to injure. Against Moria's army of zombie warriors, Luffy would have found himself nearly untouchable. The standard enemies, including the zombies and even some of the higher-level threats like the powerful zombie generals, would have been easily dispatched by Luffy, thanks to his overwhelming strength and ability to turn any battle into a game of pure creativity. Against Moria himself, Luffy would have had no trouble. The fact that Moria's zombies could not keep up with Luffy's speed and elasticity would have severely limited Moria's ability to fight back. Luffy could easily dodge Moria's attacks and overwhelm him with pure power. With Gear 5's ability to rebound from damage and constantly reshape his body, Moria's shadow manipulation would have been rendered far less effective. Additionally, Luffy's malleability would allow him to adapt to Moria's attacks, exploiting the weaknesses in Moria's techniques and countering them in ways that the original Luffy could not. The eventual battle would have been a quick victory for Luffy, completely altering the pacing of the arc and potentially saving countless hours of hardship for the crew. While Luffy would be overpowered against most standard enemies, the Sabaody Archipelago arc presents a different challenge. In this arc, the Straw Hat Pirates encounter the Marines, the Celestial Dragons, and the overwhelming power of Admiral Kizaru, a figure whose strength is immense due to the powers of the Glint fruit, Pika no Mi. Kizaru's ability to move at the speed of light and fire deadly laser beams makes him one of the most difficult adversaries in the entire One Piece universe. In a scenario where Luffy has unlocked Gear 5, the power gap between him and Kizaru would still be significant. Gear 5 would grant Luffy a far higher level of durability and strength, allowing him to take on and destroy numerous lesser enemies with ease. However, Kizaru's speed, which allows him to move at the speed of light, would present an entirely new level of difficulty for Luffy. The agility and adaptability that Gear 5 grants Luffy would help him react faster than usual, but Kizaru's light-based attacks are incredibly difficult to avoid, even for someone as powerful as Luffy. Furthermore, the lack of Haki in Luffy's arsenal would be a significant disadvantage against Kizaru. In the original series, Luffy eventually developed the ability to use advanced Haki techniques like Observation Haki and Armament Haki, both of which would have been key to countering Kizaru's speed and light-based attacks. Without Haki, Luffy would struggle to predict Kizaru's movements or defend against the light-based attacks, making the fight far more difficult than a typical battle Luffy could dominate with Gear 5 alone. While Gear 5 would make Luffy incredibly tough and hard to hurt, Kizaru's lasers would still be a huge threat. Luffy might be able to take a hit or two, but he wouldn't be able to sustain a prolonged battle without finding a way to counter Kizaru's speed. The fight would likely result in Luffy being pushed to his limits, struggling to land a hit on Kizaru, and perhaps ultimately forced to retreat or rely on outside help. Kizaru's high-speed attacks would test Luffy's limits, and Gear 5's ability to create unpredictable, exaggerated movements might not be enough to match the sheer velocity of light itself. One of the most important arcs in One Piece is the saga involving Impel Down and Marineford, where Luffy sets out to rescue his brother, Portgas the Ace, from the Marines. These events reshape the course of history, and Luffy plays a central role in the outcome. But what would happen if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 before embarking on this journey? The consequences would be staggering, as Luffy would become a much more effective player in both the Impel Down and Marineford arcs, possibly changing the entire course of the War of the Best. In the original timeline, Luffy's journey through Impel Down is one of survival and desperation. The prison is filled with dangerous criminals, and Luffy is forced to fight through several levels of the prison, where he encounters some of the most notorious inmates, including Crocodile, Jinbe, and Magellan, the poison-infused warden. While Luffy's determination is impressive, the brutal nature of the prison and its inhabitants push him to his physical limits, especially when he faces Magellan, whose poison-based abilities nearly kill him. With Gear 5, Luffy's progress through Impel Down would be much smoother. His ability to stretch, regenerate, and absorb blows would make it easier for him to survive the numerous fights. Gear 5's malleability would allow Luffy to avoid many of the prison's hazards, including Magellan's poison-based attacks, as he could stretch, bounce, and adapt to the environment. Furthermore, Luffy would have been able to deal with the various threats in Impel Down more effectively. His creative abilities would allow him to overwhelm enemies and neutralize potential threats before they could do significant damage. The encounter with Magellan would also play out differently. While Magellan's poison was a lethal threat to Luffy in the original timeline, Gear 5's power would likely mitigate the effects of the poison, allowing Luffy to continue fighting without being incapacitated. This could enable Luffy to bypass Magellan and potentially escape more quickly, setting him up for a faster rescue of Ace. The time it took to get to Ace in the original timeline could be significantly shortened, allowing Luffy to enter Marineford earlier and engage in the battle with the Marines before the war escalates to the level it did in the canon story. The Marineford War is one of the most dramatic and emotional moments in One Piece, as Luffy confronts the full force of the Marines in a desperate attempt to rescue his brother, Ace. Luffy's efforts are aided by several powerful allies, including Whitebeard and his crew, but despite this, Luffy's journey to Ace is a harrowing one. He fights through Marines, Admirals, and even Shichibukai members, all while struggling with his physical limitations and the overwhelming might of his enemies. With Gear 5, Luffy's effectiveness in Marineford would be amplified. His malleability and durability would allow him to survive attacks that would have otherwise left him crippled or even dead. Luffy would be able to take on the lower-ranking Marines and soldiers with ease, but more importantly, he would have an increased ability to handle the battle against the Admirals and other high-ranking Marines. His increased speed and ability to take on a more unpredictable form would make him far harder to pin down. The biggest change, however, would come in Luffy's ability to interact with Ace's situation. In the original timeline, Ace's death is a turning point for Luffy, forcing him to confront the harsh reality of his journey and his inability to save his brother. With Gear 5, Luffy would be much stronger and more able to intervene in the final moments of the war. He would be capable of holding his own against Admiral Akainu and others, potentially allowing him to make a more direct attempt to save Ace from his inevitable execution. While the story of Ace's death is tragic, Gear 5 could alter this moment significantly. Luffy, with his newfound strength and resilience, might have been able to reach Ace in time to stop the execution, perhaps changing the history of Marineford entirely. If Ace had been saved, the ramifications on the One Piece world would have been profound, as the war between the Whitebeard pirates and the Marines would have been altered, and the future of the Marines themselves might have been dramatically reshaped. Luffy's early mastery of Gear 5 would dramatically alter the events of One Piece during key arcs like Thriller Bark, the Sabaody Archipelago, Impel Down, and Marineford. In Thriller Bark, Luffy would easily overwhelm Moria and his minions, while in Sabaody, his lack of haki would still result in a difficult confrontation with Kizaru. However, the true impact would be seen during Impel Down and Marineford. Luffy's newfound abilities would make him a far more formidable force, allowing him to potentially save Ace and alter the course of the war. While Gear 5 would make Luffy more powerful than ever, the lack of haki would still leave him vulnerable to certain threats. Nevertheless, the combination of Gear 5's malleability, regenerative power, and sheer unpredictability would make Luffy a force to be reckoned with, pushing him closer to his goal of becoming the Pirate King. Ultimately, the timeline would be irrevocably changed, leading to new alliances, altered character arcs, and a more powerful Luffy, one capable of reshaping history. The journey of Monkey D. Luffy through the One Piece world has been defined by overcoming challenges that push him to the limits of his strength. His battles, from defeating powerful warlords of the sea to challenging the might of the Yonko, have shown the depths of his growth as a fighter and leader. The unlocking of Gear 5, however, represents a drastic leap in his capabilities, changing the course of many of the events in the story. If Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 earlier than he did in the original timeline, the outcomes of significant arcs such as Dressrosa and Wano would have been altered considerably, leading to new dynamics in his battles and the world around him. The Dressrosa arc is a pivotal moment in One Piece's narrative, as Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates take on Don Quixote Doflamingo, one of the most dangerous warlords of the sea. Doflamingo's power, stemming from his use of the Ito Ito no Mi, string fruit, allows him to manipulate strings to control others, create deadly weapons, and form powerful attacks. His devil fruit abilities, combined with his charisma and ruthlessness, make him a near-unstoppable force in the kingdom of Dressrosa. In the original timeline, Luffy struggles to defeat Doflamingo, as their battle is long, brutal, and exhausting. Luffy faces not only Doflamingo's strength but also his ability to control entire armies with his string-based techniques. The fight is marked by significant emotional weight, with Luffy's victory representing his ability to break free from Doflamingo's control and protect his crew and allies. But if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 during this time, the fight would have taken a drastically different course. Gear 5 grants Luffy immense resilience, elasticity, and regeneration abilities, making him nearly invincible. His malleability allows him to stretch, bend, and absorb blows in a way that makes him nearly impossible to damage. With these abilities, Luffy would have been able to avoid many of Doflamingo's attacks, including his string-based assaults, which are difficult to defend against in the original timeline. Gear 5's power would allow Luffy to regenerate and bounce back from injuries in real time, effectively neutralizing any damage that Doflamingo could inflict. Additionally, Gear 5 enhances Luffy's strength and agility, giving him the power to overwhelm Doflamingo's string constructs. Where Luffy struggled to break through Doflamingo's defensive and offensive techniques in the original timeline, with Gear 5, he could have adapted to and countered these attacks with ease. The battle, which originally seemed like a war of attrition, would likely have ended much more quickly, as Luffy could exploit weaknesses in Doflamingo's strategy and directly counter his powerful string-based techniques. The longer, more drawn-out conflict that was central to the Dressrosa arc would be cut short by Luffy's newfound strength. Doflamingo, despite his cunning and the range of his abilities, would have been unable to keep up with Luffy's overwhelming pace. His usual psychological warfare would lose its edge against an opponent who could adapt and regenerate at will. Gear 5 would make Luffy a literal force of nature, and while Doflamingo might still have been a dangerous opponent, he would not have been able to resist for long against a Luffy operating at such an elevated level of power. In the One Piece world, the Yonko are among the most powerful figures to exist, with Big Mom being one of the 4 emperors who dominate the seas. Her overwhelming strength, coupled with her ability to manipulate souls through the Soru no Mi, soul fruit, makes her a terrifying adversary. Big Mom's influence and power, both physically and politically, are almost unmatched, which is why the Straw Hat Pirates face a monumental challenge when they eventually confront her during the Whole Cake Island arc. However, if Luffy had unlocked Gear 5 much earlier than he did in the timeline, it's possible that his abilities could have been used to challenge Big Mom before the Straw Hats even reached Wano. Gear 5's strength and malleability would make it difficult for Big Mom to land a meaningful blow on Luffy. He could easily dodge and counter her physical attacks, and his regenerative powers would negate much of the damage Big Mom could deal. Furthermore, Luffy's creativity with Gear 5 would give him the flexibility to adapt to Big Mom's various abilities, from her manipulation of souls to her massive offensive attacks. While Big Mom is undoubtedly a powerful force, Luffy in Gear 5 would have the advantage in several key areas. His resilience and speed would allow him to avoid most of her attacks, especially when coupled with his advanced use of his devil fruit abilities. Luffy's ability to stretch and manipulate his body into cartoonish forms would allow him to turn her devastating attacks against her. For example, Big Mom's use of Prometheus, the sun, and Napoleon, her sword, would likely be countered by Luffy's Gear 5, which would let him bend and stretch out of the way with minimal damage. Moreover, Luffy's overwhelming strength in Gear 5 would allow him to deal devastating blows to Big Mom that could potentially overpower her. While Big Mom has shown incredible durability in the One Piece universe, Luffy's raw power and elasticity would have made him a formidable opponent, and with his regenerative abilities, he would be able to outlast many of Big Mom's more powerful attacks. The impact of Luffy defeating Big Mom before reaching Wano would have significant consequences for the world of One Piece. The power vacuum created by her defeat would alter the balance of power among the Yonko, and it would give the Straw Hat Pirates a major leg up in their journey to become the next Pirate King. Additionally, defeating Big Mom earlier would spare Luffy and his crew from the drawn-out conflict they faced during the whole Cake Island arc, saving valuable time and resources that could be used to prepare for future challenges. While unlocking Gear 5 early would give Luffy incredible strength, it would not come without its costs. In the Wano arc, Luffy's power would undoubtedly be a game-changer in the battle against Kaido and his forces, but there would also be significant risks to the overall outcome of the battle and the crew's safety. Luffy's premature use of Gear 5 could lead to unintended consequences, particularly in how it impacts his relationships with his crew and the battles they face. Gear 5's immense power might make Luffy reckless, as the overwhelming strength might lead him to underestimate certain threats or make him more willing to take unnecessary risks. This could result in devastating consequences for his weaker crewmates, who would struggle to keep up with Luffy's pace in battle. The strength of Luffy in Gear 5 would create a dynamic where the rest of the Straw Hat Pirates might feel overshadowed or powerless in comparison. While the crew members like Zoro, Sanji, and Jinbe are strong in their own right, they are still not on the same level as Luffy when he is operating at the peak of Gear 5. This could lead to them taking more dangerous risks or being caught off guard by Luffy's actions. In battle, the Straw Hat Pirates have always worked together, with each member playing a crucial role in taking down formidable enemies. But if Luffy became too powerful, it could disrupt this teamwork. The crew would struggle to contribute in the same way they did in previous arcs, and they might be forced to take more reckless actions in an attempt to keep up with Luffy's unstoppable momentum. In the chaos of battle, Luffy could inadvertently put them in situations where they could be seriously injured or even killed. Moreover, Luffy's overconfidence in his Gear 5 form could lead to tragic mistakes. The premature use of such a powerful ability could alter the course of the battle in ways that Luffy does not anticipate, such as triggering events that put his crew in harm's way. The more powerful Luffy becomes, the more he could push the limits of what is possible, potentially leading to unintended consequences that could reshape the entire outcome of the conflict. For example, if Luffy uses Gear 5 too recklessly in battle, it could result in him inadvertently causing casualties among his crew. Weaker members might be in the wrong place at the wrong time, unable to keep up with Luffy's enhanced abilities and forced into situations where they cannot protect themselves. Luffy's unrestrained power could create a gap in the team's cohesion, leading to moments of vulnerability that otherwise would not have occurred. In the Wano arc, where the stakes are higher than ever, the potential for tragedy is more pronounced. Luffy's use of Gear 5 might make him a much stronger combatant, but it could also isolate him from his crewmates in a way that could result in tragic consequences. While Luffy's power would certainly make him a key player in the war against Kaido, it might also serve as a reminder that sometimes great power can come with great cost, especially when the safety of those you care about is at stake. Luffy's early unlocking of Gear 5 would drastically alter the One Piece timeline, especially in key arcs like Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, and Wano. His ability to defeat Doflamingo and Big Mom quickly would give the Straw Hat Pirates an edge over their enemies, potentially altering the political and power structures within the world. However, Gear 5's immense power would not come without its consequences. The strength that would allow Luffy to win battles effortlessly could also lead to unintended tragedies, particularly if he were to become reckless or isolated from his crew. In the end, the introduction of Gear 5 early in Luffy's journey would create a new dynamic within the One Piece world, with the potential for both greater victories and more devastating losses. It would change not only the course of his battles but the relationships within his crew, forcing Luffy to confront the true cost of power and the responsibility that comes with it.